Tyler Warren is one of the best prospects in the 2025 NFL draft, but is he an elite fantasy option? We'll get to that on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. And on today's show, we're talking about one of the best pure football players in this class, Tyler Warren, the tight end from Penn State. If you can even call him a tight end because he plays 15,000 positions. But Kate, I know you watched his tape yesterday. What did you think coming out of it?
Well, let's just say it depends on which tape you're watching. It definitely depends on what year you're watching him play. That is going to be, I think, a big part of the conversation we have here for Tyler Warren. But let's start with the basics. All right. 22 years old. He's a redshirt senior, former 3-star recruit, absolutely dominated at Penn State as a tight end. And as you mentioned, he will play absolutely anywhere, and he does it with ease. Like, this dude is just a pure football player. Like you mentioned, there's no way that they didn't use him up the middle on a run, use him up the seam as a tight end, use him as a blocker, use him as a passer at times. Like, he can truly do just about anything, and he makes it look a lot easier than it actually does. He's a great athlete and was one of the most dominating receiving weapons in the entire NCAA last year, despite being a tight end, which we know doesn't always dominate at the collegiate level.
I love his tape. It's so much fun, Kate. This is like a throwback tight end. Like, we just don't have very many of these tight end prospects that come in anymore. They look more like Brock Bowers, like these guys that are just oversized slot receivers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I like about Tyler Warren is when I was growing up and when you were growing up, we got used to these tight ends that were like 6'6", 265, and that were physical and would run over defensive backs. And that's what Tyler Warren does. Like, he does a great job of making these smaller defensive tackles try to tackle him, and he can just shuck them off. He plays big. He plays big. And it's really refreshing to see.
Yeah, let's just start strengths. We mentioned the ability to play big, which, we've talked about that a couple of times in our recent prospect episodes, where just because a player has a big frame doesn't mean they necessarily play to their strength and the strength that can come with that big frame. That is not the case with Tyler Warren. He is just as physical as his large frame would probably make you guess he is. He doesn't shy away from contact with the ball in his hands. He is absolutely dominant after the catch in big play because of that athleticism.
Oh man, this is almost a Marcus Mosher twinkle because
Honorary Marcus Mosher Twinkle Award?
Twinkle in my eye award. I really appreciate the tight ends that play big and are physical. And one of the things that I like about Warren is that they can throw jump balls to him. They throw balls down the seam to him. And actually, we're going to talk about Colston Loveland maybe next week, maybe the following week. But those are two of the top tight ends in this class, but they couldn't play any more differently, right? Loveland is the guy that creates separation fast, gets open, and then kind of falls down after the catch. Where Warren is more, he's got the build-up speed. And I hate to, I'm going to give him a comp later, but there are some aspects of his game that remind you of Rob Gronkowski. Like, if you can get him moving with the ball in his hands, he is impossible to stop, but he's also a good enough route runner, and he's got the ball skills to beat you that way as well. It's not a surprise that right now on the consensus board, Kate, you want to guess where he is overall on the consensus board?
6, 5,
8. So you're talking about like
I'm actually surprised he's not higher, Marcus.
Me too. A couple of the names ahead of him I don't understand, but we're talking about like a consensus top 10 player in this draft. We'll talk about some landing spots, but the tape is absolutely phenomenal.
Tape is phenomenal. Now, we've talked a lot glowingly. You don't use Rob Gronkowski in any player's name in the same sentence unless that is a pretty strong endorsement for the type of game that he plays. And I think that's uh, a great example of the type of player that he is. I think the word that comes to mind when I watch Tyler Warren is momentum. He plays with so much momentum, and every step he takes down the field, he gets a little bit harder to stop. And, again, doesn't shy away from that contact. But let's talk about the weaknesses now, because he's not a perfect prospect.
No,
I think the biggest critique that we could probably come up with is the fact that he was a late breakout, right? I mentioned redshirt senior, really didn't do much of anything until his redshirt senior season, where he posted 1,233 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns, another 2 touchdowns on the ground, almost 1,500 scrimmage yards. Like, I think there is some reason for concern when you look at, compare Brock Bowers, right, who dominated right out of the gate. It took Tyler Warren a minute.
yeah, and this is where the context is really important about the situation because Tyler Warren, you're right, did not put up big numbers at all. It took till year 5 to break out, but he also played behind Theo Johnson, a ridiculous athlete who the Giants took. It was the third, fourth round last year,
Like
and
third.
third round, and then the year before that was Brenton Strange, a tight end that went, I believe, second. Yeah, I think it was second round to Jacksonville, who was also a ridiculous athlete. There aren't very many tight end prospects coming out in the draft that are playing behind 2 other top 100 picks at the position. Now, funny enough, Brock Bowers did with Darnell Washington, but those two couldn't. One of those guys is a receiver. One of those is an offensive tackle.
Yeah.
But in terms of like some of the other weaknesses, yeah, he's not the guy that's going to create separation. He's not Bowers in the sense of you can run a quick slant. He's going to create 3 yards of separation. That's not his game. If you're watching with us on YouTube right now, you can see that he's not the most sudden athlete, but he is highly athletic. We didn't get to see him test at the NFL Combine. I think he will at Penn State's Pro Day. And Kate, it's not going to shock me if he puts up if he runs a 4.58 at 265 pounds and the broad jump is great and the vertical jump is great. Like he is an unbelievable straight line athlete. He's just not the best at cutting, changing directions really quickly. But again, we're talking about like a 265 pound tight end. I don't know what you want him to do. That's why his weaknesses are evident, but they're not concerning to me.
Yeah, his weaknesses are kind of asterisk marks. Everything, there's no such thing as a perfect prospect. And Tyler Warren obviously going to have, some aspects to his game that he can improve at the next level. But I do think generally speaking, not a twitchy guy, but he doesn't need to be because he is so big and so athletic that, he's going to maybe run through some contact. He's not going to, jump cut to, the left, avoid a defender and then keep running. No, he's just going to run straight through you and you're not going to be able to stop him. So he's just going to keep running after that. Like that's the kind of player that we're talking about. And I think that's what makes him so fun to watch is that he does feel like this kind of blue blood, old school football player that, just seems kind of fearless. And when I watch him play, the joy that he seems to have when he's playing football is so electric and so fun to watch. And I think he's going to be a guy that maybe even if you're not, all in on Tyler Warren, which I think you should be, even if you're not all in and you're not as enamored with Tyler Warren as the rest of the draft community, I think he's going to be a guy that if you draft on your dynasty teams and you start to watch him, you are going to slowly fall in love with him. It kind of reminded me of the passion George Kittle has for the game. And that's why I think George Kittle, one of my favorite players to watch in the entire NFL, Tyler Warren has that same kind of zhuzh, the joie de vivre for the game of football.
And that's why the Gronk comparison is a lofty one. And I don't ever want to compare anybody to Gronk, but Gronk was the same way. Like you can see that he absolutely love like the physicality and the bruteness of the NFL. And I think Tyler Warren is the same way. Like I think he just really enjoys the contact. It's really fun to watch. I can't wait to get some comps later. But okay, let's dive into the analytic profile here because again, I got to assume if you put up these type of numbers at Penn State, the analytics are going to love you. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or just want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my favorite team, the Lakers, for a late game rally like they did last night, or picking a player to hit a clutch three. I never feel like I miss my chance. Plus, the app is so easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're discussing Penn State tight end Tyler Warren. Kate, what does the analytic profile look like for Warren?
The analytic profile is just as impressive as you would guess based on the fact that, he posted a 100-plus reception season here in his final year at Penn State, led the Big Ten in receptions, ranked second in receiving yards in the Big Ten, John Mackey Award winner, and it absolutely shows up in his analytical profile. Let's take a look at some of the advanced metrics per PFF. 81st percentile PFF receiving grade, 97th percentile yards per route run. Remember, yards per route run, a very sticky metric because that's telling me how productive you are on a per route basis. When you are out there, how much are you doing with the few opportunities or many opportunities that you get, relatively speaking? 74th percentile yards after the catch. 72nd percentile separation percentage, which is actually just like an open target rate. But what I think is interesting, Marcus, is you look at his separation percentage against single coverage, 25th percentile. And I think that matches pretty well with what we saw on tape in terms of the fact that, like, one-on-one, he's not going to be a guy that is creating separation.
No.
Again, because he's just going to run through it.
Yeah, he's a zone beater when it comes to the tight end position. He's not somebody that you put out like against Derwin James one-on-one and expect him to win quick. That's just not his game. Can we go back to the stats real quick the counting stats on Tyler Warren? So I want you to look at something here if you're watching with us on YouTube, but 1,200 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns. But don't gloss over the 26 carries for 218 yards. Kate, I went through the entire college football history over the last 150 years of football history. There were 3 tight ends ever that had at least 900 receiving yards in a season and 100 rushing yards. It's Tyler Warren, it's Brock Bowers, and this guy named James Casey, who I liked a lot coming out of Rice, who was like a wildcat quarterback for them, threw the ball. He just did a little bit of everything. It's those 3 players. And Warren's the only one with over 200 yards. He also threw a touchdown this year. So, like, you're looking at somebody that there's just very few players that I would just label football players rather than tight ends. And I think that's what Tyler Warren is. And when we project him to the NFL, I think he's going to be able to do all your traditional tight end stuff. But one of the things, Kate, that we've seen over the last couple of years is more teams are putting quarterbacks under center on like third and short, fourth and short. That way they don't get their quarterback banged up. I think the Ravens do it with Lamar Jackson. We've seen the Chiefs do it with Noah Gray and Travis Kelce. Like, this is becoming a trend. I don't want to say you draft Tyler Warren in the first round because of that, but it's just one more thing that he can help your offense with. And I do think it's notable. He was that good as a runner this year.
Oh, it's 100% notable. You just don't see that kind of diversity in the skill set. But I also think that, his success as a runner is just kind of a testament to, again, the type of physical football player that he is with the ball in his hands. Like, he runs like a running back. I feel like he sees the field like a quarterback, and he moves like a Rob Gronkowski. All of these
Mhm.
are absolutely incredible attributes that make him so unique. And I'm going to say one of the terms that I've heard for Tyler Warren, and I hate when we use this term for tight ends, joker.
Yeah.
But like the way that, let's say, Sean Payton utilized Taysom Hill, the
Yeah.
way Taysom Hill continued to be utilized, the like, there's a reason that I think the Broncos could have real interest. And because all of those little things that, Sean Payton looked at Taysom Hill to do at, technically the tight end, quarterback, whatever position, he could do all those things. And I think that's part of what makes him so intriguing is that it doesn't really matter where your weaknesses are necessarily in the offense. He is a player that's pretty much going to be a lock contributor regardless of landing spot. If you have a tight end, you have a starting caliber tight end in place, you have a starting caliber receiver, it doesn't really matter because he can fill in so many of these cracks wherever you have your needs in a given moment.
And that's why when I look at like potential fits, I just don't really care about who you have currently on your roster
Mm-mm.
because he can do so much. So I would like to think that he's going to be a top 10 pick, but we see generally that tight ends fall in the draft. Even someone like Brock Bowers, who we thought was like a generational tight end prospect, fell to 13, right? But I'm looking at Tyler Warren like starting at 11 to San Fran. Like, can you imagine putting him and George Kittle together for a couple years until Kittle retires? I think that makes a lot of sense. I think Dallas, who desperately needs a number 2 in their passing offense, I think he would make sense there. The fit that I just can't get over is Indianapolis at 14. Like, to me, that seems like Tyler Warren's floor. If he's available to the Colts at 14, I don't know how they pass up on him just because that's the type of player they've been missing forever. I've got to believe a lot of these teams are just going to have Warren really high on their board because he's just one of the best players in the draft.
Yeah, and I know we did say Brock Bowers fell a little bit. I do think there's some context there just in terms of looking at the draft classes, though. Like Brock Bowers fell, but he also was drafted behind a really good quarterback class, right?
Was
That
it 6 quarterbacks went ahead of him?
yeah, like
3
that
receivers?
that definitely pushed him down the board a little bit. But like those concerns here, the number of wide receivers that could go ahead of him, the number of quarterbacks could go ahead of him, that's not really a concern here. So like I do think this draft class at the very top of things feels a bit more wide open than I'm going to say the 2024 class, just because it's not as top heavy a class. But I mean, I do think that he's kind of a foolproof prospect. I wouldn't be surprised if you see him go a bit earlier. Like we've talked about the potential fits of wide receivers in Jacksonville. And I think, again, Brian Thomas's skill set is just so unique that I think a lot of these players we've already talked about could be good fits. But like the team just released Evan Ingram, you're in the middle of a full rebuild. Like, how fun would Tyler Warren be
Sure.
in that Liam Cohen offense? Like, I just don't think there's really a bad spot for him to land right now, which makes him super intriguing. And I don't
I was
know.
gonna
I
say
want him.
last year we almost had the Rams trading up for Brock Bowers. They tried like crazy to go up to get him. We've heard the Broncos mentioned as a team that wants a joker. I just won't be surprised if somebody makes a big move up for Tyler Warren because I do feel like he's one of the safer players in this class. And I know like historically teams don't trade for tight ends, but he's just too good of a player to not try to go up and get. So again, teams like Denver, the Chargers. Oh my gosh, can you imagine him with Justin Herbert in Jim Harbaugh's offense? My prediction is that somebody moves up to grab Tyler Warren, and it's not going to be him falling to 14 or anything like that.
You know who I could like picture being a kind of intriguing fit? The Pittsburgh Steelers. They love blue blood football players.
Met
And
with him
that
at the
is
combine.
exactly what Tyler Warren is. Let's say they don't land a wide receiver. Let's say, like, we know this isn't a great draft class for wide receivers. It's not super top heavy. Like the talent's not as rich at the top as we've seen in previous classes. Let's say they don't land a DK Metcalf. They desperately need a more dynamic pass catcher. Tyler Warren could be a really intriguing fit just based on like the physicality of the Pittsburgh Steelers and the way they like to play football. I would not be surprised if the Pittsburgh Steelers absolutely fell in love with Tyler Warren as a prospect.
Let's talk about some comps and his current dynasty value. We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day, and find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Kate, comps and dynasty value. What do you got for a comp?
Comp is hard for Tyler Warren specifically, Marcus, because when you watch him play, you see elements of a lot of really outstanding players. Like the diverse skill set, I liken that and the kind of passion for football to George Kittle. The yards after the catch ability, very George Kittle-esque. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned the Gronk and the physicality that he plays with, I'm having trouble because a lot of the comparisons that I'm coming up with when I'm watching Tyler Warren feel way too lofty.
I know. And that's the thing. It's like you look at like a size and athleticism standpoint, like Logan Thomas, who was a really good tight end for Washington for a long time, I think is comparable. But I don't think Logan Thomas played with the same physicality, was never the same natural receiver. I've seen some people compare him to Greg Olsen, who was an incredible athlete coming out of Miami. But again, he was more of a wide receiver type than a dominating after the catch tight end, which is where this leads me back to a future Hall of Famer, Jason Witten with the Cowboys. Now, not Witten, you remember when he was running like a 5.25 40-yard dash, but like early Jason Witten from the early 2000s, because Witten coming out of Tennessee was a 4.6 tight end at 6'6", 265 that would make plays down the seam, would make plays after the catch. I think he's a little bit more dynamic than what Witten was after the catch, but I wouldn't put him in that Gronk tier. Yep. But again, listen to the guys that we're comparing him to: Greg Olsen, Jason Witten, Rob Gronkowski. Like, I think Tyler Warren's going to be okay.
That's why it's so hard to have these conversations, because he takes a lot of the bits like that, you can kind of piece together, and all of those bits from different players that he reminds you of in terms of like play style, size, physicality, all of those players you're borrowing from to build the big picture that is Tyler Warren are NFL great. So that's my struggle with him, is almost because I don't want to get hurt again. I don't want to get Kyle Pittsted. I don't want to get Kyle Pittsted, right?
I think Kyle Pitts, he had 1,000 yards as a rookie. It was the second tight end ever to do it. I think the injuries just played such a big factor in there that I don't know if we'll ever know what the true ceiling was, but I understand the concern.
Yeah. And I think it's just always a concern when you're watching a player and you're thinking of these elite future Hall of Famers in their I don't know. I feel like anytime I get that excited, I always want to take a step back and temper my expectations. So let's talk about Tyler Warren and his dynasty value, because we've mentioned this is a pretty good tight end class in general. Mm-hmm. Colston Loveland, you love, and I think different player than a Tyler Warren, but
he's what Dalton Kincaid should have been. We'll talk about that next week, but he's what Dalton Kincaid should have been.
We'll talk about that. Yeah, we'll talk about that another time. But there's a lot of talent, I think, in this tight end class. There's a lot of dynamic athletes that had some nice production. Like I feel pretty good about this tight end class. But what I think is the more interesting conversation is where he falls in just the general ranks, right? Like, where do you have him in the mix when there are so many questions at the tight end position. You have your elites like your Brock Bowers, your Sam Laporta, your Trey McBride. Where does he fit in that before he's ever stepped on a football field?
And that's where I wanted. And that's where I wanted to get this conversation going is, if you look at the current tight end rankings, and again, we're just assuming a net neutral landing spot.
Yes.
I have him as tight end 3 right now, behind Bowers and behind McBride, ahead of Sam Laporta. And I know that seems ambitious, but at the same time, I remember us doing a show last year with Matt. We were talking about Bowers, and it's like, I know these other guys are proven, and they're, Bowers is a rookie, that hasn't even been drafted yet, but I just believe in the talent so much. I'll take Bowers as my tight end 1. And now I think the gap between Bowers and tight end 2 is bigger than any other gap in dynasty leagues. If you are of the same mindset that Tyler Warren is tight end 3, or let's say even tight end 4 at worst, I think you're thinking about him inside the top half of your rookie draft in round 1, because he's just going to give you such an advantage over every other tight end weekly. Whereas somebody like Luther Burden, who I love, or T-Mac, or Matthew Golden, or Emeka Buke, those are good players, but I don't think they're going to give you the ceiling of Tyler Warren. So to me, you can talk me into Tyler Warren like anytime after the top 2 or 3 running backs.
They might not even give you the same floor that a player like Tyler Warren is going to have. And I think that's kind of the intriguing part of this. But when I might be even more bullish than you on Tyler Warren in my rookie drafts this year. When I'm looking at like super flex rookie drafts, right? So we're prioritizing quarterback, Ashton Genty, obviously the consensus 101. Cam Ward, I feel a lot safer about than a guy like Shedeur Sanders. Tetairoa McMillan, we talked about him, like him a lot, but I still don't think he's necessarily as safe a prospect in terms of how I'm viewing the trajectory of their NFL careers. Tyler Warren just feels like a player with one of the safest floors, while also having a pretty darn similar ceiling based on the size, skill set, athleticism. I think he's closer to like the 3rd player off the board in your super flex rookie drafts than he is the 6th.
Well, because I think you're going to have Genty, and I think you're going to have Hampton. I guess the only thing that would hold me up a little bit is like, what if Travion Henderson lands with the Cowboys in round 2? Or what if the Chiefs draft Quinshad Judkins at the end of round 1, or with one of their 2nd round picks? Like, I do think there's some possibilities where these running backs land in very favorable situations, but you're not wrong. Like, I think after you get past Genty and Hampton, and I would say Cam Ward, again, super flex league, I think Tyler Warren is in that conversation for the next pick.
Yeah, and I get the appeal of, a whatever running back honestly lands with the Dallas Cowboys. Maybe it's Najee Harris, I don't know. But whatever, there are a lot of rookie running backs though that I think could land in really favorable spots. So like, if I'm looking at Tyler Warren and I'm saying, okay, like I think he's going to have the longer NFL career. I think, running back is a scarce position in fantasy football in general, but there's no position as scarce as a tight end position. And so like, let's say you're in a tight end premium league. I think you need to prioritize Tyler Warren so far and above beyond these running backs. Maybe you can trade back into the first round, end of the first round. You're still probably going to get a guy that could be a day 1 contributor in this particular running back class. But you're not going to find another Tyler Warren in the late 1st, 2nd round. Well,
we'll talk about Colson Loveland next week.
I don't know that Colson Loveland's going to fall that far, but
no,
maybe.
He's probably not. But I do like Colson Loveland. I can't wait to talk about him. But go check out the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Next week we've got free agency that starts on Monday. I'm positive we're going to have some trades. Probably a DK Metcalf trade the next couple of days. We had a Christian Kirk trade. So we'll get you caught up on all the news and how it impacts your dynasty leagues. Download that Locked On Dynasty Football podcast wherever you get your podcast. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosier. Enjoy your weekend, because next week the show will go on.